Welcome back to the ConsumerFi podcast, everybody. Joel Kennedy here with Jermiah Wheeler, who's the president of DRN and MVTRAC. Welcome to the pod, Jermiah.
Thanks for having me, Joel. Glad to be here.
So Jermiah, is very involved in all matters of industry type things. He's no stranger to the dais within the industry conferences. NAF appreciates your involvement as I appreciate your involvement in the American Recovery Association. And we wanted to talk a little bit about the state of the industry. And I love having Jermiah involved for a number of reasons. One, you got the pluck and the talent and the skills to get it done, but also just where you sit in terms of DRM and MVTRAC is just an interesting point of view and perspective. And so I think it puts you in a good brokering position. But last week you guys were out in, let's do a quick plug. Last week you guys were out in Denver for the American Recovery Association, the National, the NARS. I'm trying to think what NARS stands for. This is terrible.
It's the Repossession
North American.
Summit. Yeah,
North American Repossessors Summit. There we go.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I screw that one up all the time, trying to get it right. But yeah, we were out there. We were able to tour the property where we will have the event in June. Beautiful property. Unfortunately, we could not really. We could see where the golf course should be. It was covered in snow, but I've seen, and the golf course is phenomenal. We were able to negotiate the right start times for our golf event. We're looking forward to a really, really good conference this year. We're still lining up speakers. I think we plan to put out a call for speakers to fill some of the slots that we have, but the golf event will be epic. We're actually thinking of throwing an 80s theme out there for the golf event. We're bringing in more prizes and more sponsors this year than ever before for the golf event as well. We plan to use that as a podium to raise more money for Repo Alliance and the Recovery Agents Benefit Fund. So just looking forward to it. I mean, the property is awesome. It's very it's not tight in a bad sense. It's tight in a sense that you can really get from one meeting room to the vendor room to the breakout sessions, all within a 3-minute walk. And so we're really looking forward to it being out there in June.
That's tremendous. I may actually try to pick up some sticks. My first job was actually at a golf course, but I'm terrible at golf, and I don't have the time or the patience for it. So I guess if they're doing some kind of a scramble or something, I might not be chased away.
Yes, it will be a scramble. So it's really fitting for all golf swings and all parties involved. The goal really is just to get out and spend time with each other. And in June in Denver, it's going to be beautiful, green and perfect weather for golf for sure.
I love it. You mentioned two things I wanted to maybe. This is not meant to be a plug, but for folks on the lending side, you may not have an understanding of the lay of the land. So let's just spend a couple quick minutes talking about the RABF and the Repo Alliance, Jermiah. Can you tell us a little bit about the RABF?
Yeah. So the Recovery Benefit Fund, its Recovery Agent Benefit Fund, is an organization that if an agent gets hurt or God forbid, gets killed in the line of duty, they step in, and with the right, they obviously require an application process and that sort of thing, but they'll step in, they'll validate the information, and they will provide funds for the family of the fallen or family of the injured agent. And so it's an organization that DRN and MVTRAC have been part of and involved with for a few years, actually since inception. I think it's more than 5 years now. And we've seen and heard many really good stories from agents that were injured and could not work, and RABF stepped in and saved that family's livelihood from going down the wrong road. Anything like that is worth getting involved in and putting your money behind it. And so we usually donate a set of LPR cameras that are usually auctioned off. We've done it many times, whether it be at the NARS conference or even kind of in the middle of the year. We've thrown it out there and done that for other state trade associations auctions. And 100% of the proceeds go straight towards that fund. And then on the other side, we also donate cameras to Repo Alliance, which, I think if you're in the industry, you've probably seen or heard of the Repo Alliance and how important it is for, getting and having a voice on Capitol Hill, whether it be at the federal level or even at the state level. In some cases, it's important for lawmakers to be educated on who we are and what we do and how we affect the positive access to credit. And the recovery and collections process is a vital part of the credit ecosystem in order for people to have fair and balanced access to credit. So, the repo world has never really been represented at that lobbyist level, but the Repo Alliance was put together in order to fund lobbyists specifically focused on the repo space.
Yeah. And it's an honor to have, the talent that we have in that chair is tremendous in the firm, the Van Scoyken Associates, class act, experience on both sides of the aisle. I mean, this is a legitimate game of getting information and data and fact in front of the legislators, in front of the congressmen and senators that have to be informed. Because look at the Build Back Better plan, right? I mean, they were talking about, we need to pass this. And then once we pass it, then we'll describe what's in it. Right. Like, I don't know. That's kind of, it feels, I don't understand the inner workings of DC, but luckily we have somebody who does, right?
Yeah. Well, you've got to have someone that's dedicated to spending the time, not only reading, but understanding, comprehending, and defining bills.
Yeah.
Because, there are plenty of pockets in every bill to hide or, tuck information in there that could severely change the scope and breadth of an entire industry.
Yeah.
We've seen it happen in the past when the pandemic originally hit and they put moratoriums in place.
Yeah.
Which, is the right thing to do when you have a natural or a national disaster declaration. Obviously, you have to put those things in place. At the same time, though, you need to understand long periods of time of that, how that affects credit and access to credit, because unless you plan to bail out every single lender out there with, funds that technically we don't have as a nation. I mean, we're going to go into debt to do it. And then that money has to be repaid over the next few years. And so a lender having to forgive, even in some cases, they're still forgiving some debt, or they're not collecting on it, or they're not able to go into foreclosure processing on mortgages. That negatively affects their ability to freely lend at a competitive market rate.
Yeah.
So what you've seen some lenders drawing back and kind of pulling back how much and how aggressive they're lending in certain segments. And what that's done is it's allowed other lenders that have not been in the mortgage sector to really jump in feet first and start freely lending, because it's just the cycle will come back to where you're already hearing and seeing of bankruptcies increasing dramatically across the board. You're seeing a steady increase in default rates in the auto sector month over month. I think, I've talked to a couple of very large lenders in the recent past, and they said, we're thinking that we will be back to pre-pandemic norms as far as defaults and the flow of repossession volumes and everything, some as soon as June of this year. And so if you look at that and you say, okay, well, what's the next step for the government? Well, I think we're watching very closely the CFPB and what their plans are for how they go in and audit new lenders or existing lenders on new pieces of business. It's all up in the air, but at the end of the day, we have to understand that we need to educate the lawmakers so that there's a clear understanding across the board for our business to exist in order to allow lenders to keep their losses as low as possible. It's a vital part of the ecosystem, right?
The need for an individual, no matter where you live, to have transportation was really amplified during this pandemic, because there were people that live in urban areas that are able to take public transit that might not have felt as safe to do that. They might have had somebody at home who was exposed or whatever, but you still have the business of the day to get to work, to get your kids to school and this and that. And, that's the government assistance during the moratoriums was helpful for sure. And at least what I've seen is that cash did flow. A lot of times that cash does not flow because the borrower may be burdened with so many other financial issues that they're playing a game of picking and choosing, right? It's nothing personal. But one of the issues, and I like how you brought up the increase in bankruptcies and defaults. Obviously, inflation, we're all feeling it when we go and try to buy gas and groceries and things of that nature. And that always concerns me. Sounds like employment is doing okay and people are finding those wages. I think there is some employment gaps, right? So some industries that people are just saying, I think I had to go, I had to do penance on Saturday. I rescheduled a personal tennis match, and my friends didn't want to play at 8 a.m. So I had to do penance and pick up coffee for everybody. Jeremiah, I had to go to 3 different coffee shops. Starbucks, the other local guy, and then I ended up going to one of those little, it used to be like a photo mat box, kind of like in a parking lot, right, and get 4 cups of coffee there, because the first 2 places weren't open. Starbucks was just drive-through only, and the line was, way down the street. So, I mean, there's some real issues out here. It's going to come to a head. I like hearing that folks are kind of putting a stake in the ground and saying, yeah, around June. So then that begs the question of, where do you go? Well, on the lender side, 2 big things, right? One, what do I want to do with my new originations, knowing that the supply chain is still amplifying the supply side issues for vehicles, for new vehicles? And if we're not out repossessing used vehicles that are in, say, the 3 to 7 year old time, age, there's shortages, right? There's issues. So then you get a little bit more competitive and you start advancing more for loans. And then your loan severity goes up and your frequency is probably going to go up as well. So this is the landscape that we're looking at. And I think lenders and recovery professionals together should take a good unified look at this, right? To make sure that we know what we're up against and that we have our ducks in a row. For folks that are listening to this, that maybe they were in, one of these situations where they are purchasing automotive debt, but they've not done a lot of repossession. Maybe it's like a credit union or a community bank or something like that. Can we just kind of lay it out for them? Like, what are their options, right? So you can go direct, you can go through a forwarder. And then there are other ways you can kind of hedge that risk, because these are the key players that we're going to get into about some of the financial issues that are really hitting the recovery agents that I think we wanted to get into today. We just want to make sure that we keep that message going. And Jeremiah, you've been a tremendous voice for that. And I thank you on behalf of the whole industry for that. But yeah, let's get into that a little bit.
Well, I mean, if you start with, I guess, the latter part of your statement there, where, if you're a lender, regardless of what type of lender you are, and you have recovery needs, that you have the nationwide forwarder, which is essentially an outsourced service provider, so to speak, that partners with hundreds of direct repossession agencies across the country, and they provide a service to a lender. The forwarder over the past 20 years has gotten larger and larger in scope, because lenders essentially wanted to be able to, one, not have as many people internally. I mean, you kind of saw it with the outsourced revolution that took place over the past 20 plus years, right? Where people were getting call centers and other things. They were outsourcing everything they possibly could. The other big thing, though, I think the reason that they have chosen to do that is because it mitigates a lot of risk on their part, right? Because the forwarder provides this indemnity blanket, if you will, in between the agent in the field and the lender at the top, and you have that forwarder in the middle. So there's a cost savings aspect to it just around people, and then there's a liability savings, if you will, because if it's just the lender and the direct agent, there's typically more management that has to take place, more compliance checking, and more things from the lender's perspective. And then they, in the liability process, there's a little bit more connectivity with the direct act happening in the street. But you do have some lenders that still like to use that hybrid model where they use direct agents everywhere across the country that they possibly can, especially in your major metro areas. Some large lenders have anywhere from 80 to 100 agencies that they work with nationwide, and their first choice is always going to be direct.
Yeah.
The direct agents outperform forwarders across the board. I mean, when you average out the recovery rates, you're always going, when you look at a direct agent versus a forwarder, you typically are always going to have a much higher recovery rate with a direct agent than you will a forwarder, because in my opinion, the forwarders take a lot of work that's outside of the norm, outside of the coverage areas, maybe in more rural areas where there has to be mileage charged in order for an agent to run, up in the mountains somewhere to go check an address or see if the car's there. And so you'll typically see lower recovery rates on the nationwide scale versus my direct market here where I cover. I know very, very well, and I typically perform really well. And you'll see, sometimes a 10% gap there where direct agents outperform the forwarders. However, at the end of the day, I think the forwarders are going to always have a place in the market. It just, there were so many of them that were popping up over the last, 10 or so years that it somewhat, commoditized the market almost, if you will.
Yeah.
And the lenders have this plethora of choices when they look at which forwarder they want to use. And then they're always doing these champion challenges, right? So they're always trying to maximize their results. And in my opinion, the agents are usually the ones that suffer from that when you have forwarders coming in and chopping prices, and they're winning business based solely on price and not on performance. Because to get your foot in the door, most forwarders will offer a lower price. And then the lender says, you know what, I can save this much if I give it to this guy. And then if they perform, then we've won on both sides, right?
Yeah.
We're saving money and we have performance. But that always flows downhill and downstream to the agent. The agent's the one that typically will receive the shorter end of the stick there when it comes to overall fees. And so what we've seen over time is we've seen this, instead of your, buying a car, for example, right? You buy a brand new car every single year and you get the same make, the same model, the same bells and whistles every single year. You see a certain percentage increase in that price every year.
Yeah.
It's because the cost of doing business, the cost of materials, the cost of everything goes up. It's a typical, simplest way to look at it. It's just a cost of living increase, right?
Yeah.
Your wages go up every year. If you stay with the same company, they bake in every single year a cost of living increase. And so, but what we've seen in the repo side of the world is we've seen shrinkage over the course of the past, 20 or 30 years. I know that, there's been plenty of articles put out there in CU Collector and CU Repossession that shows the repo rates back in the late 80s and early 90s was, some cases higher than they are today.
Oh, yeah.
Of what the repo agent's making in terms of just top line revenue. But then you look at what did a tow truck cost back then versus what does it cost now? I mean, I remember, 6 or 7 years ago, you could get a pretty good brand new loaded out tow truck for 70-ish thousand, depending on which model and which bed you bought and which self loader you bought. But let's just say it's around 70 grand, and that same vehicle today is over 100. And so it's costing more and more and more to do business in that space. and the revenue flowing into that space is less and less and less per transaction. And so, you say, how can an industry survive? They can't. I mean, it just it's not going to happen. They will continue to close their doors, and slowly but surely, one after the other will go out of business unless we get some significant change, which we have seen happen here recently. So that's a good thing.
Yeah, the fact of the matter is that I think the majority of recovery companies are probably more of like a family business, a mom and pop type thing, and you have junior running cars, and then ultimately it gets handed over to junior, and because there's so many people that I know that are multi-generation, and I just assume, but I know that there's been a mass amount of attrition of the number of repossessors, and so there's been some consolidation ideas, right? Like let's bundle everybody together and kind of share some overhead. Not a bad premise. But I think I think the ones that we've seen kind of fell apart in some of the execution. I'm sure some of them were working just fine. But yeah, it's that rate that gets passed through to the ultimate repossessor, whether you're going direct or through a forwarder. I think people are starting to see, especially during these times when we know we're about to ramp back up and there's been stress placed on those industries. Look, if we're not recovering and we're not repossessing, then the repossessors are not working. And,
right.
and it was a little sticky just to even, at the ARA level, they were advocating to try to help people get through the PPP process and things like that. And I think there was some navigation that had to be done to make sure that people were getting, small business loans and the PPP loans. And I'm happy to hear that they're surviving. We just want to make sure that they're going to be thriving as we move ahead. And it's my wish or hope that the lenders that are listening, before you start going and really ramping back up your recovery process, take a minute to kind of take an inventory of what you're paying for these things and look at your vendors and just make sure you're being a good broker and you're being fair with the rates and the wages that you're putting out. I'll give some examples, and I know we didn't want to get into the details of how the fees are compiled, but I just want to give some examples of some places where we've kind of shut some doors. And this is information that I got facilitating lenders at an ARA, a NARS event a couple years ago. And so you have cancel fees. Mm-hmm. So if I gave the case to you and you're a recovery agent and it's just, maybe it was too deep of a skip or something, we're just not finding it. So I have to pay from a lender side. I say, why am I paying you money to close this? It doesn't make it. Why am I paying you a success fee when there was no success in a way? That's how they view it. So that's been a point of contention. Then you have things like storage, transport, or cutting keys. So we talked about it that last session about having, I'm the lender and I have 10 cars on your lot. I want to send on my own guy to cut the keys because he's going to do it much cheaper. And the recovery agent is saying, hold on, you're not paying me close fees. You negotiated me down on storage, and now you're taking this away. Like, I was actively putting this in line to make sure that I can stay above water, and now you're taking this away. And so, the dialogue really has to be there. We have to have that open line of communication with the lenders and the recovery professionals. And I think that's going to be a lot of what we're going to talk about at the upcoming NARS event. And that's why I mentioned it. I think between now and then, I'd like to see a lot more progress and movement on that. Like, where do you really think the conversation needs to go?
Well, I think it has to start with the agent management groups within those lenders. And they have to turn and have conversations with the broader executive group within their lending institution. They need to be having conversations with their analytics team and their financial team to say and show that we need to increase the cost of recovery for our organization. And this is why. I mean, it's easy for anyone to turn around and say the cost of living is higher right now versus last year and the year before and the year before, especially right now with the shortages of employees and the cost to hire new employees just in general at all levels. we've seen it across the board, just like you used the coffee shop example earlier. If we don't pay a certain wage or higher, they're just not going to come to work, or they're going to find work in other places where they feel like they're making a fair wage. And so the cost of doing business for a lender out downstream to recovery agencies, that cost is going up. And if you want your assignments to be chosen and picked and ran appropriately, you will have to become competitive with the lenders that are stepping up and paying a higher wage, and that are considering paying fuel surcharges and other incentives for agents to run. So we've heard from a few lenders that that they are paying higher fees, they're giving raises. But if you take one example, I read an article a couple of days ago about Capital One putting $26 million, pulling $26 million and putting it back into their general fund, if you will, from credit loss reserves, because they didn't lose as much as they forecasted that they were going to lose, right? And so they're, in a simple way of putting it, they're saving money and they're making more money on the recoveries that they are doing than they have in recent years, because vehicle values are through the roof. So when they are liquidating those assets, they're making more money. So if you look at the entire landscape of, can a lender afford to pay more for their recoveries to happen? Yeah, they can. We all know that they can, but they can't within the bounds of their individual budget.
Right.
So they have to step out and say, we need X percent more, because we want to be aggressive. I mean, just like they want to invest and be more aggressive on the lending side and offer better dealer programs, offer better consumer programs, and lower interest rates to have that business flow into their shop, they will have to do the same thing on the back end of their business and be more competitive there for those recoveries to flow into their shop. And so that's what we'll see changing a lot. And I think that's what, the communication and conversations will be about at NARS this year too.
Yeah. Another element to this that I think definitely drives results that I sometimes take a bit for granted. I say, okay, I'm going to outsource I'm a lender and I'm going to outsource my entire recovery process. There's a whole lot of ground to cover in between that recovery when you do that assignment and the work that you've been doing with a customer that has otherwise gone skip on you or silent, or you haven't had, when do you start skipping? What do you start doing? And then when do you actually assign? I think there's a lot right there that for some smaller, maybe less sophisticated lenders, they just figured, well, once it hits day whatever, CFOs calling it, once it hits day 60 or day 9, then we'll flip it over to these guys and they'll take it from there. Mm-hmm. I think for lenders, if you really want to enhance your ability to get better dollars recovered, you got to have that step in between where you're running that skip and you are actively trying to avoid the repo and help the customer and really be in there battling. So, that's the one thing I throw out to the lenders is make sure this is not just a throw it over the wall, because I think 9 out of 10 recovery professionals would tell you, yeah, you threw this over the wall too late. There was no work that was done. You missed a bunch of opportunities to find out where this person was going, where they are. And now you throw it to me and it's kind of like, nobody really, this is like Old Maid. It's like playing Old Maid. Nobody wants the Old Maid card and you just threw an Old Maid my way.
Right. Yeah, that happens. I think it happened a lot more in the past, obviously, because there were many, many more assignments coming through. And it's funny because some lenders will flip assignments from one forwarder to another forwarder.
Sure.
When both of those forwarders use the same downstream agent. And the agent's like, I just got this, I had this 2 weeks ago from another forwarder, and now I get it. And guess what? It has the exact same information on it, the same addresses. I've already updated those. And so it's like, why flip it if, they flip it because they see a slight tick uptick in recovery rates when you flip assignments. And in most cases, it's because the receiving agent potentially could be different, and they run the one address the one time, and the car just happens to be sitting there,
Yeah.
and it gets that slight uptick. But I think most lenders, they don't usually, now they're all contingent pretty much. They don't pay close fees. They don't pay cancel fees, or even in some cases, if I've heard of instances where an agent is sitting at a car because they got an LPR hit, and they're sitting at that car waiting to receive the assignment. And then a direct agent who has the assignment from a lender pulls up, and the lender they call the lender and said, well, this agent's waiting for the order to come from a forwarder because they got the LPR hit. And the lender will make the first agent drop it and go away and allow their direct agent to pick it up, and they don't pay that agent a fee to set the car down, when technically they've done all the work. They're waiting to pick up the car. And so typically what we will do at MV is we'll pay the agent in that case to set the car down, go on about your business, and then we'll try to recoup that from the lender. But the flipping process, for some lenders, it works really well, and it's very well thought out, and it makes sense. But I've seen lenders flip it every 14 days, and they continuously flip and flip and flip. And the bad part is if you're a lender on, and you use iRepo, for example, every time you flip that assignment, the receiving agent, or forwarder, actually, the receiving forwarder has to pay $2 to accept that assignment. And so forwarder A paid $2, 14 days later, forwarder B paid $2, forwarder C paid $2. And so, the platform is making really good money, but the forwarders who are paying that $2 every time that account flips, and no recovery because they're operating contingent, they get nothing.
Yeah.
Out of it. And then some forwarders that force down that $2 fee down to the repo agent, they really get shafted in the process because they didn't get to recover it. They have no billable whatsoever, and they're paying $2 to receive that assignment. And so, those types of things need to be considered when a lender's thinking through that flip strategy. And then, to the skip portion of your comment, most lenders I see will flip an account to skip and pay a much higher fee, typically after charge off. So post 120 days past due is typically what I see there. And some lenders will get creative and they'll offer an incentive right before charge off. It all depends on how their financials are managed.
Yeah.
Some really care about that charge off dollar, that lost dollar not going up too high. And some say, you know what, it's a function of accounting. We'll charge it off today and we'll take it as a loss, but then we'll recover those dollars within a few months,
right,
on the backside, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of financial mechanics going on. It's interesting you mentioned Capital One. They're very good at the analytics, and they're also, I found them to be very just exceptional when it comes to the financial engineering and financial mechanics that go on there. Jeremiah, let's we're running out of time, so we want to draw this to a close. We mentioned a bunch of things that I think are very relevant to our lenders, some of the organizations that are at play. Obviously, DRN provides information, right? You provide the LPR and the data access there, which is an instrument, very necessary instrument for us to help skip and recover. I guess in terms of final words, I'm going to see at the conferences, we're going to keep pushing the issue of driving more integration, more collaboration between ARA, NAF. We were at Used Car Week. We had Jan from RMAI. We had the folks from AFSA. That's what I'd like to see moving into the future. What would you like to see kind of in the next year? If you had a dream, what would that be?
I think the shortest way to put it is just continued collaboration, open and honest collaboration without all the guard, everyone having their guards up, thinking that I think in the past, pre-pandemic, even anytime people were having conversations, they were very guarded because they're worried about competition taking business. And I think through the pandemic up until this point, we're kind of like wide open. Here, let's put everything out on the table and figure out the best way to work together so that we all, at the end of the day, have a common interest, and that's to remain relevant, remain profitable, and make sure that we are providing value to the end user and the client. And so if I had one, perfect storm of a wish, I would say it would be for us to continue to collaborate to the point that we educate everyone across the board that may not understand or be uneducated to a sense that they don't understand what it takes to do this business and to do the work and the cost of doing this business. I think more and more lenders, agents, and everyone they're learning more about each other, and they're learning how to work better together and put everything out there on the table. So I think you'll continue to see that. We have concerns, obviously, about regulations coming down and more regulations and scrutiny there. And so your AFSAs and your RMAIs and other associations that work very closely with the lobbyists, including the Repo Alliance, everyone, we really need to focus our efforts on the right way to collaborate and contribute. So it's really just continue to get involved and make sure that you're being open and honest with everyone around you to make the industry better for everyone. Very well said. Trust is an important component. I think it's a great currency for us to trade. Let's trade on that trust, baby. Yeah. Well, at the end of the day, I teach all my employees, and I've told myself this 100 times, is, in my opinion, you are your best and worst competitor. How you do things, how you communicate, and what ROI you provide is really the most competitive advantage and disadvantage that you have as a business. As a person, obviously, we sell our brands every day of who we are and how we communicate with people, and that trust factor, the integrity piece of it is very important. But we don't need to be focused on competitors. We need to be focused internally on ourselves and make sure that we are providing the best service, that we're being the best that we can be, and we're treating others with respect and how we would want to be treated. And I think if you do those things and you focus more internally, everything else would just work itself out. Competitors will come and go, but you can't let people distract you from your mission. Very well said. And that's going to be our final word. This has been a pleasure. We have Jermiah Wheeler. He's the president of DRN and MVTRAC. Jermiah, thanks so much for joining us today. Thanks for having me, Joel. Appreciate it.